Welcome to the Unbounded Podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology, human rights, and the fight for freedom. What if Bitcoin isn't enough? Today, I'm joined by Seth for privacy, educator, builder, and one of the most trusted voices in the fight for digital sovereignty. We dive into the real battle, building privacy that works, confronting the limits of Bitcoin, and making the case for Monero when the stakes are the highest. This is practical defiance for those who can't afford to be seen. Save in Bitcoin, spend in Monero. This is Unbounded. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm pumped to be here. I've loved how you've kicked off the podcast, and I know we've had some back and forth and chatted a few times in the past, so I'm really excited to be here. Vital topics to get into as always, and I always love seeing someone else stepping into the educator podcaster arena and taking one for the team. So the more you do, the better you do, the less I have to do. So I'm all for it.
Trying to do our part here, Seth. First thing I want to jump into with you is you've been on the front lines for years now. Not sure how much you want to admit how long you've been in the battle, but I think but you've been pushing for real privacy, self-sovereign financial privacy at least since 2017, 2018. But just from a personal perspective, what's that journey been like for you, and kind of what keeps you going, and what's the hardest?
Ooh, man. Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. I mean, it definitely goes back a ways. Like you mentioned, I think I really kind of started just being vocal in the space around 2018. But I was very, very new, very early, was just starting to care at all about any sort of personal privacy, care at all about Bitcoin, Monero, and really just honestly waded into X specifically, formerly known as Twitter, to just to be able to ask questions and learn more. I'm a very, very curious person. When I find something that I'm passionate about, I go really deep, really fast. And that definitely happened. And in these things, specifically with Monero first, and then ultimately that actually led me to Bitcoin, which I know is a bit backwards for most people. But I think the thing that keeps me going is that I've found that there's this niche that not many people are hitting. And it's not a niche that is going to feed the algorithms of social media, but is a niche that people really desire. And that is just having nuance, being willing to not take sides necessarily, to not make everything black and white, to not engagement bait people, but just being willing to get into the details, to unpack the nuance that is almost always present in all of the debates that are going on social media, especially on Bitcoin Twitter. And just be able to do that in a way that is nuanced and willing to dive into the gray areas. And that's something that is rare. It shouldn't be. It really should not be rare.
Well, Seth, they say social media, all nuance is just completely lost, right?
Oh yeah. And the algorithms, I mean, they incentivize you to rage bait and engagement bait and angry posts and shit posts, all of these things that are not usually beneficial for discourse are normally the things that are getting promoted by the algorithm. And so you're definitely kind of battling the algorithm when you take this approach. But I found that it's just something that people really respect and really desire, because as much as we engage with and feed the broken system of angry posts and everyone wanting to dunk on each other, that it doesn't lead to better discourse. It doesn't lead to better conversations. It doesn't lead to people learning the right way or the better way. And it doesn't lead to better relationships either. It's really just detracts from everything. And so there's this core desire for people to really be able to get into the nuance and to understand what's actually going on, not just what influencers and podcasters, no offense, as I'm also a podcaster, are talking about, but to actually kind of get into the weeds and unpack it a bit, because people really do want to see behind the curtain and understand what's going on and think for themselves. But I think many people think that that's impossible. So when they see things distilled in a way that's approachable, it, I think, helps to unpack for them that, hey, I can actually dig into this. This person is explaining it well. These are the next steps, the next resources. And that's something that people really desire.
Yeah, and that definitely comes across for me, and definitely what the attraction is, whether you're right or wrong, right? I think you've made it really, really clear that people need to do the thinking for themselves at the end of the day, right? And not get caught up in kind of the tribalism and all of that. It definitely can get pretty nasty out there. But on the flip side, so you're an educator, you use Twitter X as what seems like one of your main social media platforms out there. What's been the benefit for you from an education perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that I've thought a lot more about with the advent of Nostr, which is this Bitcoin adjacent social media platform relay thing. It can do a lot of things, but mostly people talk about it from a social media perspective. And it kind of made me rethink, like, why am I on X versus any other platform?
Social media in general, but but we're talking about X.
For sure. Why that specifically? And I very intentionally don't have any other social media. 2 reasons. One, social media is the devil. It's really bad for you.
I agree.
And I do not want to spend any more of my time than absolutely necessary on social media. So I'm not going to put in the time investment to be on any other platforms than just one platform. And honestly, the reason for X is just that I can have a very good reach. I already have an established platform there. And my goal is not being on the most sovereign platform or doing the best job of making sure that my speech is free. That sounds weird, but to me, the most important thing with where I'm going to actually publish the things I'm thinking about, write about what's top of mind for me, discuss and debate with other people is the platform where more normies, more normal people who are new to this journey, who are new to the concept of privacy, new to the concept of freedom money, of using Bitcoin privately, of Monero. I want to reach those people. I don't want to reach the people who are already within this echo chamber. And most of the platforms like Nostr, for instance, are a hyper echo chamber. And I don't feel like my voice would be helpful there at all.
Sure. Has that changed for you? I think I remember at the Finney Forum, if I'm not mistaken, I remember you saying that the audience that you're going for, you're not trying to necessarily red pill people on privacy technology and Bitcoin and Monero per se, that you're really focused on people that at least have identified it as a problem, like, big tech and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think overall that stayed exactly the same. Because something I quickly realized, as much as I would love to be able to evangelize the idea of personal privacy, of self-sovereignty, of personal responsibility, it's, to me, very difficult to impossible to actually convince people of a need that they don't already see themselves for some other reason. They haven't had a kind of a wake-up call or a bad incident of kind of getting burned some way or seeing a family member struggle because of a data leak or something like that. If they haven't had any of that, I don't see much value in trying to convince them. I haven't seen much effectiveness in that. Early on, I would say that was more my strategy, and I quickly shifted away from that. But I think also part of that is I'm a terrible evangelist. I'm just not that kind of person to show you on why you need this thing or why you need to care deeply about it. But rather, I think my specific skill set is much better served to help people who already understand that. They've already seen the system we have on the internet today is just totally broken. The way money works is totally broken. I need to change something, but I don't know how. I don't know where to start. That, I think, is the much more useful kind of point in the funnel to target for me specifically with my skill set. But there are other people out there who are fantastic evangelists, for lack of a better word, that are really good about engaging with people who have no care or desire for personal privacy, but unpacking for them why that matters. And there are people better at that than me. But for me, I think the most impact that I can have with my time, and I try to be very careful with my time because there's always more that I can do and less time in the day. The most impact I can have is capture those people at that kind of point in the funnel of, I know there's a problem, I don't know how to fix it. And then I want to be there with the resources and the education and the explanations to help people understand where to go from there.
Interesting. How do you think of Nostr? So you said that you're kind of comparing the two platforms. How are you thinking about that today for yourself and for your mission, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, for me right now, I'm fairly notorious in Bitcoin circles for being a Nostr hater. So I think that the protocol itself is interesting for some very niche things. But for social media, I think it's a very, very mediocre reason to need something new. There are some technical advantages to the way Nostr works. There's also some terrible, terrible disadvantages to the way Nostr works, specifically around privacy. There's a massive uphill battle around user experience that has to be fought. And none of that's even talking about the network effect of social media platforms like X, like Facebook, like others. And so I think for me, I view Nostr as a good fallback. If Elon goes nuts, if X goes nuts, and they become these highly censored, totally broken platforms, it'll be fantastic to have something else to move off to that is not just shifting trust to another single entity. Switching to Blue Sky or something like that doesn't resolve the issues that we have on X, even if maybe it improves some of them. So I think it's a fantastic fallback. For me right now, especially, it's just like a hyper Bitcoin echo chamber. There's not that much for me on there personally, and specifically with how I'm targeting who I want to reach. Those kind of people are just not on Nostr. Like, you have to be really deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole to even know what Nostr is, much less be on it. So that's not the kind of person I want to target. Not to say there's no value for someone to be on there, not to say that Nostr as a whole is totally useless, but I don't view it as extremely valuable for social media specifically, and especially not valuable for me and what I'm trying to use social media for.
Got it. So back on the question I asked you earlier, you've been on the front lines for years, for a long time. What's one challenge that has really tested your resolve the most, would you say?
I think probably I would say, I don't know, maybe there's two things. I think one that's constantly challenged my resolve is just a lack of a desire for privacy tools within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there is no one who desires it or no one building it. There are people. But when you look at what's getting funded in the Bitcoin space, when you look at what's getting airtime and debates in the Bitcoin space, like Authoritarian drama and changing denomination, and the people who are pushing these things, but who aren't talking about or funding new privacy technology around Bitcoin, it's really a struggle to continue wanting to care about Bitcoin, like, if I'm being completely honest. And I say that as Cake Wallet, where I'm the VP. We just launched PayJoin V2, which is new privacy tech for Bitcoin. I love that, but there's so many limitations on what we can actually do for privacy in Bitcoin, and so few people and so little funding going into it, that it's very hard to want to stay in the Bitcoin conversation, especially. That's held true when we talk about like covenants, which there's some upgrades that could be done to Bitcoin that would make self-custody far better, that would allow for better privacy tools, that would improve solutions like Lightning to make them much more user-friendly and allow people to use them in more private ways. And just like none of that stuff is ever going to happen, I don't think. And so it's a little hard to remain engaged there, is something that I've struggled with off and on over the years.
So Seth, you're like one of the most optimistic people I know in the space. You sound almost pessimistic. I'm teasing when I say that, but are you optimistic or pessimistic at the moment? And be honest.
Yeah, I think I try to kind of think as an optimistic pragmatist. Like, I know that's probably not realist, correct English in any way.
Optimist, pragmatist, realist.
Yeah, all the words. Yeah, I mean, like, I just try to remain attached to reality. And I feel like often when we get too optimistic or too pessimistic, we can be very detached from reality and miss the good when we're on the pessimistic side, or miss the bad when we're on the optimistic side, and end up wasting a lot of time and effort. So I try as hard as I can to stay attached to reality and to remain as hopeful as possible. But there's limits where, like, if you're too optimistic and too hopeful, you will spend your time on things that are never going to happen, that are never going to have a positive impact, because you're detached from the reality of what adoption looks like, of what product market fit looks like, of what the demand from actual users looks like. And I think this is a constant issue in the space, the privacy space at large, cryptocurrency as well, is there can be this over-optimistic view of like, if we build it, they will come. Like, if we build it, it'll happen, it'll gain adoption. And that's almost never the case. We have very specific things that we know that users desire, and a large set of things that users are never going to touch because they make their life more difficult instead of easier. And so, yeah, I try to stay attached to reality. And when you've been in the Bitcoin space as long as I have, which is not long compared to a lot of other people I acknowledge, 7 years feels like 8 or 9 lifetimes.
Well, I say if you're in the privacy-focused area of the industry, you age by at least a decade more than most people.
It's true. I think 7 years is 70 years. In
dog years, man.
Yeah.
It's dog years.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think it's just like the longer you spend in it and the less change actually happens, necessarily the more you start to become pessimistic about some future improvement like covenants happening, some future improvement like Lightning becoming very easy to use without giving over self-custody. Those kinds of things that have been promises for years and years in the space and haven't materialized, like at some point you kind of have to write it off and move on. And I think that's where I'm currently trying to figure out, like, what's reality.
Right. And when do you walk away? Like, I feel like for a lot of people, I'm just getting the sense, especially those that are very passionate about privacy and really care about these things, from a human rights perspective and things like that, that we might be getting to a point within the next year or two where you really have to just kind of make a decision whether these things are really going to happen or not, right?
Yeah.
Are we really going to have just good enough, privacy on Bitcoin at all? And is this just like, because when I think about it, I spend so much time trying to be, non-technical person who's very passionate about being a sovereign Bitcoiner, financial freedom, as much as I can push that needle in that direction. But man, it's a lot of time on the weekend and things like that. But let's hold that off
Sure.
You've described yourself as a quote unquote, freedom tech maximalist. Freedom tech maximalist. What does that actually mean in practice, and why does it matter now to you?
I think in practice, what it really means to me is that I'm not, at least as far as I can as a human, I'm not caught up in a tribe. I'm not focused on one solution having to be the way no matter what, not caught up in a specific cryptocurrency, in a specific privacy app or privacy technology, and rather trying to maximize what the actual useful tech stack is for people. And I think a big reason why I use that term is because it's a little bit of a play on the Bitcoin maximalist thing, where there's this cabal of people within the Bitcoin space who have, for malicious reasons or for I don't know why, have blinded themselves to everything else. Maybe cabal is too aggressive of a word, but
a cabal.
They've chosen to write off anything else no matter what, and have thus become very detached from reality. Freedom tech maximalists definitely targeted at that.
Yeah. Do you think that view can hold much longer? You've talked about that. I think the reality is that everybody can, I think, agree on at this point that we're going to live in a multi-crypto world, whether you like it or not, right? And I feel like holding on to that view, this kind of Bitcoin maximalist view, is just not going to do it. Again, if you're interested in freedom tech, right, from a freedom perspective, and you're interested in building these technologies for dissidents and people living, in Burma and, in the Middle East and these countries that are just being ravaged by inflation and things like that, right? Like, you have to be more open-minded than that, I think.
Yeah, no, I think the idea and the popularity of Bitcoin maximalism has been dead for some time. I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding that people think that there's still this core of Bitcoiners that are extremely antagonistic towards anything else. There are certainly people like that. It's honestly, I would say probably a handful of people who still stick to that kind of hardline Bitcoin only, everything else is a shitcoin kind of policy. But most of those people have very strong financial incentives to do so, and I think are just not being intellectually honest because it would benefit them to keep this Bitcoin maximalism thing going. I think for the vast majority of people, and I'm talking about many, many publicly Bitcoin only podcasters, influencers, etc., behind the scenes, they already accept it's a multi-crypto world. Many of them already use Monero, many of them use Ethereum, many of them are totally fine with other cryptocurrencies and have no problem with them. And it just, again, it comes back to, are you attached or detached from reality? Like you said, we live in a multi-crypto world. These cryptocurrencies are not going away. They cannot be stopped, which is kind of the point of them. Even if they're centralized, we've seen that some of the centralized garbage just keeps on going. There's not a way to stop it. Railing against them on Twitter is not going to stop it. And people ultimately want tools that best fit the job that they need to get done. And sometimes that's Bitcoin. Sometimes that's Monero. Sometimes that's Ethereum. Sometimes that's other things. And one of the absolutely most powerful things about cryptocurrency that is very underrated is that unlike fiat currency, we can go back and forth between different cryptocurrencies very easily, very seamlessly, often in trustless ways where there's no other entity that's being trusted in that process. And that allows you to really have your cake and eat it too, really be able to maximize the benefit to whatever you personally need to achieve from using the right crypto from the job. It's the same thing in the privacy space. There's not there are signal maxis or whatever. I don't know if there really are, but there's a lot less maximalism because there's not the financial incentives behind it that there are in the crypto space. I think once you see past that, once you talk to most of these people behind closed doors, everyone already admits it's a multi-crypto world. This is the reality. Use the tools that work best for you. And I think this Bitcoin maximalism thing is essentially dead.
Interesting. Some people haven't gotten the message, but I digress. So how would you describe the moment that we're in right now within the sovereign Bitcoin space, especially when it comes to like privacy, surveillance, and the future of digital sovereignty?
I would say this is probably the most pivotal fork in the road moment for the sovereign usage of Bitcoin that we've seen, at least in my time in the space, for two reasons. One of those is that while technically we're out of an extraordinarily antagonistic anti-crypto, anti-privacy administration in the US, a lot of the things that they started have continued. Prosecution against Samourai wallet, prosecution against Tornado Cash, things that both destroyed privacy technology that we had available to us, especially like Samourai wallet in the Bitcoin privacy space, and sent shockwaves through the broader space and caused many companies to bail on providing privacy, caused many developers to pivot to working on other things, understandably. So I think like that is one of the pieces where there's this legal element that like you and I as individuals have very little say in. Obviously, we can fight the good fight on social media. We can make sure that people understand this. We can put whatever pressure we can on the legal system, but we don't have really any direct sway in what happens there. But the outcome of those cases is ultimately going to decide a lot about what can and cannot safely be done by companies and entities building on Bitcoin, which when we think about Bitcoin from like the cypherpunk perspective, you may think like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like we can just build it in a decentralized, anonymous way. But the reality of Bitcoin privacy is that because there is no privacy on the base layer, and quite the opposite, Bitcoin is built to be transparent by design. Anything that you want to use to gain privacy almost always relies on some central entity to provide it in some way. But there are exceptions to that. Silent payments is an exception. PayJoin is an exception. But those are really tertiary tools and aren't providing holistic privacy on their own and are really missing the kind of forward-looking privacy that something like Samourai Wallet's Whirlpool provided, that CoinJoin as a tool can provide. So I think that legal angle is one of those pieces. And then I think at the same time, we're also at this pivotal moment where the Bitcoin community is deciding, are we going to have any more changes in Bitcoin or not? And overwhelmingly, it seems like there is great support within the developer community of wanting something like covenants, something simple that helps us to build much better tools that can lead to better self-custody, better privacy, better Lightning wallets, etc. There's great consensus there. But amongst the podcasters and influencers and Bitcoin Twitter folks, there's still a lot of debate on that. And I think with the Authoritarian drama, which I assume we don't want to get into today, and it's not worth getting into from a time perspective, I think that changed in a lot of people's minds a willingness to change Bitcoin in any way and made it much harder to get anything across the line. And I think if that doesn't happen, the ability to actually build good privacy tools, to build good self-custody solutions, to build good Lightning wallets will be greatly diminished. And the openness to any future improvement to privacy at the base layer will be closed off as well.
Wow. The stakes seem like they couldn't be higher. It's really, really interesting. I mean, these cases, obviously, a lot of people understand the implications, but I think a lot of people still don't, especially the average number go up person who's, just waiting for Bitcoin to explode or whatever they think. So just taking a step back. So are we winning or are we losing the freedom, money, privacy wars, Seth?
It's a good question. I think in a broad sense, I think we are winning in that the tools available to us are better than ever in most areas. And there are exceptions to this, like Samourai Wallet that I just mentioned, but overall, there is really cool things happening that if they gain adoption can have a serious impact in the Bitcoin space. Silent payments and PayJoin are two examples of that. The tech is there, the code is there, there's implementations live now. We just need more people, more exchanges, more entities to actually adopt and use them. And I think at the same time, the availability and access to things like Monero, to Monero, I would say things like to Monero, is ensuring that we have a hardcore freedom money available to us no matter what. Like there's no way to shut down Monero. There's no way to prevent people from swapping Bitcoin for Monero. Those things are just going to be able to happen no matter what happens from a legal or regulatory perspective. And the tooling around Monero specifically has gotten so much better over the years. So I think like in the broad sense, I really do feel like we are winning, but that doesn't mean that we've won. And I think that's a lot of the distinction that falls apart quickly is people think that Bitcoin is inevitable or that freedom money is inevitable or that these things are going to happen just because there's overwhelming momentum or pressure for them to happen. But that's just simply not the case. There's still a lot of ways in which Bitcoin could fail. There's a lot of ways in which Bitcoin could be co-opted or censored. There's a lot of centralization risks, like with mining right now. So it's certainly not like we shouldn't be doing victory laps, but I do think that there have been some really good developments across the space. Just generally, privacy tech is getting a lot easier to use. Like the user experience aspect of things is just immensely better than it was 4 or 5 years ago across the space, which is a huge deal because that means that the average individual can actually achieve these things rather than it being just for the highly technical developer code line guy. It's something where the average person can actually achieve them. So I would say, like, I know some of what I've said so far can sound very pessimistic and doomsday, but I would say overall, I do feel like we're winning. I just feel like we need to be careful to make sure that we keep up in the arms race and that we keep winning.
Yeah. It's kind of the fog of war at the moment. I think it's going to be another 5 or so years, maybe, before we can kind of look back and say definitively whether we won the battle or not. But what's your honest take on the state of Bitcoin privacy today? Is it improving? Is it stagnating? Is it just more kind of performative than practical at this point? What's your high level overview on that?
Yeah, I think it's another tricky one to answer because, like, pre-Samourai wallet indictment. Be
careful, Seth. People will listen to this and flame you on X.
I'm sure it's inevitable no matter what I say. So I've learned to distance myself from caring about what people say on Twitter for better or worse.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally it certainly is improving, but is not at the like minimum barrier for me of recommendation, which is that a normal person can achieve good enough privacy. I would argue that before Samourai wallet was taken down and before some other fallout happened around that, I would say that we were at that good enough state where you could get good enough privacy without being extremely technical, even if it wasn't straightforward or super easy. And that was achievable. I would say we kind of had to start over after that, and there are some benefits and some drawbacks to that. I think the benefit has been there has, from some in the space, been a renewed effort around privacy in Bitcoin to drive other options that don't rely on a central entity. Things like silent payments, which are a massive improvement to user experience first and foremost, but also privacy from a receiving perspective in Bitcoin. That effort has really taken off. Cake Wallet's been leading the way, but I'm hopeful that others will jump in on that effort soon as well. That has really, I think, gotten more attention and focus because of the loss of other privacy tools. People realize, hey, we need to build things that aren't going to be shut down with one indictment or with one person going to jail. We can't be that vulnerable to adversarial environments. And then PayJoin is another really good example of this. PayJoin V2 is a massive improvement over the old way to do PayJoin. For those who don't know, PayJoin is essentially a way for you to work with the person you're sending money to both contribute inputs to that transaction. And it breaks a lot of the normal chain surveillance that companies like Chainalysis can do and can rely on, where they can no longer assume that the inputs in a transaction are owned by the same person. They can no longer assume that the value of an output in that transaction is the amount that's being sent from person A to person B. It breaks a lot of the basic heuristics, and again, doesn't require any central entity to work. It relies on a server for the two users to coordinate, but that server can be run by anybody. It's completely agnostic. It never takes custody of funds or anything like that, and has good network level privacy. So things like that are growing in both the simplicity of use and the breadth of adoption, which is a really good thing. So there's like bits and pieces, but I think a lot of people get caught up and think like, oh, well, we have silent payments now, like Bitcoin privacy is fixed. Or we have PayJoin now, Bitcoin privacy is fixed. We can kind of dust off our hands and move on. But these are just like very small pieces that do help user privacy, but on their own do not solve the overall core issues with Bitcoin's transparency.
Man, the nuances get lost big time on X on this topic.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So you've used the phrase good enough privacy. I've heard you use that quite a bit. Where's that line between privacy that protects and privacy that's just kind of checks off a box?
I think the line for me is when we're talking about personal privacy, I think we have to look at it in two different ways, like two different basic threat models. There's a lot of in between, but the two basic threat models I think are a person who just wants to or needs to avoid mass surveillance. Like you don't want Chainalysis just happening to figure out exactly who you are and how you use Bitcoin. And then you have the alternate, which is you are a person who is extremely at risk, be it a dissident, a journalist, a freedom fighter, like whatever it is that your role is. you are a targeted individual. You know that nation states, chain surveillance companies, law enforcement, etc., are going to be targeting you specifically and trying to pierce through any privacy steps that you take. And those two basic camps are kind of how they're a helpful framework to look at how useful is a privacy technology. For most people, if they can avoid mass surveillance, that's what I would call good enough privacy, where you know that if you're not explicitly targeted and you know that you're a relatively low risk, this is going to provide good enough privacy so you don't have to worry about the more common things, the things where KYC data being leaked from Coinbase, for instance, reveals not only your Coinbase identity, but because you withdrew to a single address and didn't use any privacy tools, it reveals everything about your on-chain activity too. You can avoid that by using good enough privacy tools to get there. Whereas like for the targeted individual, a lot of these things are just not going to fly when they're actually being individually surveilled. A lot of this technology is good and useful, but could be seen through by someone who's determined and has enough resources. But for most people, I think that good enough line it's in the words, good enough for them is all that is absolutely necessary for like the initial steps towards personal privacy and the common threat model. And so that's kind of my lowest bar of I don't really want to recommend anything unless the average individual can get good enough user privacy. I think Monero is a fantastic example of this right now because it's near perfect at preventing mass surveillance. Arguably, you could even say perfect at preventing mass surveillance, but does have some very specific edge cases where individual targeted surveillance could cause problems for Monero. Now that is going to change. Even targeted surveillance will be much more difficult to impossible after an upgrade to Monero that'll go live soon. But generally, that's kind of how I think about things, and is the lowest barrier I find. If it can't provide good enough privacy, I'm not going to recommend it because I don't want people getting burned.
So what's the bar for you? Is it the lower bar, or are you more focused? What level are you trying to get at? Are you trying to cover both use cases, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, like my kind of target audience is normally someone who would just need good enough privacy. So a lot of times that is the most common bar for me. And that's why like Bitcoin with Samourai wallet in the ecosystem, I felt like was good enough for the average person and even had some reasonably good protection against individual like targeted surveillance. Mm-hmm. That being said, like the other side of things is I'd love to do what I can at least to help educate dissidents, journalists, people who are at risk and who could reasonably face targeted surveillance on what those more hardcore tools are. And that's where like understanding what the privacy Monero brings versus the privacy of Bitcoin brings is really, really vital. Because for many dissidents and journalists, they can get by with Bitcoin at its lackluster privacy because of a lack of resources of the nation state that they're being targeted by, amongst other things. Right. But for many, they can't get by with that, and they have serious issues because of that. There's some evidence of this in the opposition in Russia to Vladimir Putin, where their Bitcoin usage was being tracked and surveilled quite easily by Russian federal agents, and that was causing problems for them. They needed a deeper level of privacy, and so they started using Wasabi Wallet, which I generally don't recommend for lots of other reasons, but that was their solution to that because they did realize, hey, we actually are being targeted here and we are suffering because of the lack of privacy.
So which tool do you think offers more kind of practical protection in the real world, Bitcoin or Monero?
I mean, I think the question, the answer is undoubtedly Monero for two reasons. One is that the lowest bar of privacy that's provided by Monero is vastly better than the best possible scenario for Bitcoin privacy. And that is achievable by literally anyone because you just use any Monero wallet and you gain incredibly strong protection, especially against mass surveillance. You don't have to do anything extra. You don't have to spend any time learning about anything. You can just use it and you gain very strong privacy. The only reason why I would recommend people to ever look at Bitcoin is because it does have a bigger network effect. It does have more merchant adoption. It does have more real world usefulness for specific people. And so there might be some reasons why you need to use Bitcoin, especially for payments, over something like Monero. But when we're talking about like what provides best privacy, it's hands down Monero. Monero is by far the most useful and most used privacy cryptocurrency anyways, but it's definitely the better solution to Bitcoin. But the reason why I continue to be invested in Bitcoin and want to see the privacy tooling improve is because of that greatly expanded reach. Lots of people are going to come in. They're going to learn about Bitcoin first. They're going to use Bitcoin heavily before they ever hear about Monero. And I want to make sure that those people have access to privacy tooling, and that those people who have a specific need for Bitcoin have the ability to use good privacy tools at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, there was a blog post that you did a couple of years ago where you said, if I had to recommend a financial tool without the chance to deeply, quote unquote, educate, it would continue to be Monero. So it seems like that hasn't changed over the last couple of years. What do you mean by that? If I had to recommend a financial tool without the chance to, quote unquote, deeply educate? I think I know what you mean, but
yeah,
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, basically just that achieving privacy on Bitcoin is not something where you just pick up a wallet and you do it. Like I say that as someone building a Bitcoin wallet that has cutting edge privacy features. It's achievable, but holistic privacy within Bitcoin is very, very difficult to achieve for the average person. And so like if I'm recommending something to you, and I know, especially if I know that you have any chance of having a targeted threat model in the future, I would feel very hesitant to recommend Bitcoin unless I had a lot of time to sit down with you and walk through these things, unless I had a lot of resources, you had a lot of time and willingness to dig into how to solve all of these problems with Bitcoin, all the different tools you need to use. And I mean, honestly, even right now in Bitcoin, it's not as much an education problem as it is a technology problem, where without Whirlpool, so without Samourai Wallet Whirlpool, and without a really good alternate PayJoin implementation, there are some serious limits to the privacy that can be achieved no matter how educated you are. So that's really what I mean is like I can freely and happily recommend Monero to anyone, no matter the threat model, because I know that it's going to be a fantastic tool to protect their user privacy, and then I can go deeper with them if they have an extremely targeted threat model. But that's going to be the very, very, very rare, like 0.0001% of people. Whereas for the average person, Monero is just going to solve all the privacy needs that they have at the financial level. There's obviously other things that go into personal privacy, but at the financial transactional privacy level, it's going to solve that. So yeah, that's the core of what I mean. There's a reason that I think a lot of YouTubers and podcasters stick with Bitcoin, because there's just so much education necessary for a lot of the basic stuff, like especially around privacy. Like you can't make that much content around using Monero because you just use it. But when you talk about Bitcoin privacy, like famously, I think Matt Odell had like a 37-hour course learning how to do like basic Bitcoin privacy stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours, as a non-technical person who's deeply motivated to try to make it happen. I've spent hours and hours. And then when, the Samourai incident happened, it was like the rug was completely pulled, all that investment, all that time, and then trying to figure out how to recover from that. It's unbelievable the amount of time that I put into it. But I think I'm starting to, I blame you for red pilling me on Monero. I mean, if you're passionate about privacy from a human rights perspective, you have to look at Monero. I mean, yeah. and I've looked at a lot of the different crypto, stuff out there, and it's the real deal, and it's not going away anytime soon. But what have you seen or heard from people using Monero, for example, like under pressure in these, dictatorships or authoritarianism, whether it's like Bitcoin or Monero? Like, what are you hearing from people who are actually using these tools or on the ground? For example, in Burma, you've got a civil war going on there. People are desperately trying to fund a resistance. Do you have any insights into things like that and what you're hearing from people?
Yeah, I actually got the chance to go to the Human Rights Forum.
Oslo.
The Oslo Freedom Forum put on by the Human Rights Foundation, the HRF, last year. And that was a fascinating insight into how different my thoughts around what people needed was from the reality. As a serious privacy advocate and someone who pushes really hard for the more hardcore solutions, it was a wake-up call to learn that the vast majority of people using something like Bitcoin actually aren't even using Bitcoin, and they're generally using stable coins on Tron or other very centralized, very controlled networks, because their threat model, strangely enough, and you wouldn't think it without talking to them, is generally not one that surveillance is a problem for them. It's generally not one that
they just need a friendly government, right?
Yeah.
Like they just
or an incompetent government, or incompetent. And I think normally that's the reason why they're able to get by with Bitcoin or with USDT on Tron, is that a lot of these places the government just does not have the resources or manpower to put into chain surveillance and put into actually they don't have the leverage over exchanges that aren't in their country. They don't have the kind of tools available to actually change how people are using these tools, even if they know that they're being used, even if they can surveil those payments. A lot of times that's actually not a big deal for people, which is fascinating. I think we should not take it too far and think that, well, then we don't need Monero. We don't need privacy tools on Bitcoin.
They're catching up too, right? Like I'm thinking of places like Vietnam and Southeast Asia. You know, when social media came out, it was that same scenario. The governments did not like it. They knew it was going on, and it's taken them years to kind of catch up with the technology. A lot of that technology is coming from China now, and they're helping these countries kind of build out that infrastructure to shut these things down. But the same applies here as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they will continue to catch up, and the knowledge and the tools that are available primarily to countries like the U.S., primarily to the U.S. government, those tools will become more and more normal, and will become cheaper and cheaper as they just become normalized. So that it will be something where we are in an arms race. Maybe in these countries the governments are far behind the arms race, but we can't get too comfortable with that. Especially I think there's also the other angle that maybe is under discussed here of journalists and dissidents. Those are definitely people who need these privacy tools, but it's also just something the average individual needs, especially in a world where there's a broken internet that is constantly capturing and collecting data, in a world where cryptocurrency is now a well understood, well known thing and a serious threat vector of theft and kidnapping and murder. There are serious risks to not taking your financial privacy seriously when it comes to cryptocurrency that often are actually higher for people who aren't dissidents and journalists in remote global south countries, but rather are high profile individuals that are going through Europe or something like that, where privacy is something that can be by far the best security method as well. So I think there's always more to consider here, and the average individual absolutely needs these things. But it is fascinating to learn how little a lot of the current journalists and dissidents depend on decentralization or privacy for usage, and rather just need the thing that will work the best from a monetary perspective. And oftentimes that's stable coins. Sometimes that's Bitcoin. Very rarely does that involve any kind of privacy technology.
Yeah, I think it's where you reside, right? If you're in China and you're a dissident, that's a very, very different calculation, right?
Yes.
You need to have these privacy tools immediately, right out of the gate. I think a lot of these countries, they're just not there yet. And it's really, they're just trying to solve an immediate problem, right? Whether that's, I spoke with a dissident from Burma that had to escape, right? And he's just trying to get out of the country. He'll worry about privacy, later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on. You've plainly said it, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, but you say save in Bitcoin, spend in Monero. You were the first person I believe I heard that from at the Finney Forum a couple of years ago. But why do you think that this kind of dual stack approach is still taboo for so many Bitcoiners? And what does it break open when we stop treating these as kind of like an either or scenario?
I mean, to be completely honest, privately, it is not taboo. This is a very, very common practice that has been common for years. I first talked about this actually at Guns and Bitcoin in 2020, I think. Maybe 2021. I can't remember what year that was. And as far as I know, nobody was talking about this concept yet, but it was already something that people were doing. Most people who have gotten into Monero started as Bitcoiners. And overwhelmingly, even though just like in Bitcoin, there are Monero people who are maximalists and pretend that we don't need Bitcoin or anything else, overwhelmingly, most of the people who are into Monero live in a multi-crypto world, embrace Bitcoin, embrace Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies for the value that each provides. So it's already a common thing, but it has become drastically more common, and the taboo has been completely shattered since the Samourai wallet indictment. I cannot...
Yeah, I'm sorry. This was a question that I had. Has Monero benefited, for lack of a better way of putting this, from the Samourai wallet incident? And to what extent? How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like we talked about before, this bar of good enough privacy on Bitcoin was completely shattered with Samourai wallet being indicted, with the fallout that came with that as well. So the vast majority of people who care deeply about privacy on Bitcoin and needed to actually use something to make payments, they started using Monero right away. I cannot count the number of DMs and messages and conversations that I had with people in the weeks and months following that indictment, getting them onboarded to Monero, helping them to learn the best tools, getting them onto a wallet, and showing them how there's just simple stuff works, answering common privacy questions that they had around Bitcoin and if they apply or not to Monero. Like, these conversations are in the hundreds, I don't know, maybe the thousands just for me. And I know that many people are coming to Monero without ever talking to me. So I certainly only have a lower bound to speak to, but there has been a massive shift. That taboo is totally broken. People who are actually seeking to use these tools for freedom, like I think you mentioned this earlier, like
right.
There's always obviously a group of people who are blinded by financial incentives or just blinded by tribalism. But the vast majority of people are not like that. The vast majority of people, they are just seeking to use something that helps to empower them, that gives them more freedom with how they transact. And they've started using Monero over the last year now. That shift has been monumental, and I think that the taboo has really been broken. And I know I've said this on other podcasts and stuff, but even before that, the number of Bitcoin-only, Bitcoin maxis that already used Monero, that already ran Monero nodes, that already paid for things in Monero before that, but just didn't want to talk about it publicly, is wild. Like, this is something that has been a concept for a very long time, and it's a perfect symbiosis. Like, Bitcoin has proven its store of value. Monero has proven that it is by far the best tool for spending if you care about privacy. Why would you not get the best of both worlds? Like, I would rather spend in Monero, and for better or worse, I think Monero absolutely can be a store of value. There are technical reasons to think that it would be an even better store of value. And recently there's been better price performance.
How dare you
I know.
Oh my God. No, I think this is fascinating, and you've really turned me on to this. And I think about this a lot, this multi-crypto world, this symbiotic relationship between Bitcoin and Monero. The more I think about it, the more profound that just the possibilities. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe this is the killer scenario, right? But what do you think? What are the opportunities? Do you think it kind of breaks open this dual stack approach, for lack of a better word? What are some of the opportunities, do you think?
Do you mean like for the individual or for businesses to build around?
Yeah, for the individual.
Yeah, I mean, for the individual, it's the ability to kind of mirror what a lot of people I think already have in the real world, for lack of a better term. But this idea, I mean, that's very common, especially among privacy preserving people, of you're probably not going to keep all of your money at your house. Like, as much as people talk about that, most people are not going to keep everything in cash or gold at their house. They're going to have a bank account. They're going to save that way, and they're going to want to spend. The best way to spend privately is to use cash. And unfortunately, this may be a dying thing in much of the US and in a lot of Europe, but a lot of people still absolutely love to spend cash, even though it actually adds a lot of complexity and difficulty to the spending process. To me, Bitcoin and Monero are very similar, but Monero is drastically superior to both the user experience and the usefulness of cash. So you're getting the savings. Bitcoin has proven itself for savings, like I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity it opens is that you can spend without self-censorship. You can spend without this nagging concern over what will happen if someone finds out about this spend in the future. You can spend without the worry of what will happen if the thing that I'm doing now that is totally legal becomes illegal in the future, but the history of this transaction is embedded in a blockchain forever. Mental tax, that mental load, that self-censorship goes away when you realize you have strong financial privacy without difficulty. You're not having to jump through other hoops. Swapping between Bitcoin and Monero takes seconds to start, 10, 20 minutes to complete. It's very, very simple. And the ability to just essentially store your wealth in Bitcoin and keep some Monero on the side for spending, whatever you need for the month or for the 3-month period or whatever, however you kind of want to split that up. It's incredibly free. And it's also a much better user experience than trying to spend privately in Bitcoin, than trying to use Lightning in many scenarios. It's much easier to use Monero. And so it simplifies things, and it just gives you freedom without all of the hassle. It's a really beautiful pairing.
I love it. Does Bitcoin need Monero in some sense?
I would say yes, and I would say that Monero needs Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around, just like in the Bitcoin community, there's a lot of Monero people who think that like Bitcoin shouldn't exist, that it would be best. Like it would be best if the leading cryptocurrency was private by default. So I obviously don't want to argue with that, but that think that Monero would be best on its own, that they shouldn't work with anyone else. They shouldn't care about any kind of Bitcoin bridges, that they should just focus on just Monero stuff and let Monero stand on its own. But the beautiful thing about this relationship is that Bitcoin is actually the best on-ramp to Monero possible. You can get Bitcoin so many ways at so many places. The network effect is wild for the actual accessibility of Bitcoin. And if you can get Bitcoin, you can get Monero seamlessly. So no matter what governments do with shutting down on-ramps to Monero, which they've been aggressively doing for years now, it doesn't matter because they're not going to shut down all of the on-ramps to Bitcoin. And you can very simply, very privately go from Bitcoin to Monero. So like we need to understand that no matter what, Bitcoin is at the very least a vital on-ramp to Monero. And vice versa for Bitcoin, Monero is a fantastic spending tool that allows more people to save in Bitcoin. I think there's many people who probably wouldn't save in Bitcoin if they didn't have the ability to spend privately one way or another, because they don't want to have to deal with the headache of what that looks like within Bitcoin. But Monero enables them to continue saving in Bitcoin because they have specific reasons for that and quickly and seamlessly move some money into Monero every month or whatever to be able to spend from. So I think they very much need each other. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need both, and one of them would do everything and have the network effect of both and would take control. I've said frequently, best case scenario, Monero wouldn't need to exist. Bitcoin would implement powerful privacy features, and we could move on from Bitcoin. I have no tribal attachment to Monero. I don't really care about Monero in the it must win sense. I care about it in the terms of what freedom it provides, and if Bitcoin provided that, we could just shut down Monero. We don't need it anymore. Like Bitcoin can do that. But unfortunately, that is not the reality. So until then, Bitcoin absolutely needs Monero, and I think Monero absolutely needs Bitcoin.
Fascinating. Yeah, you've talked about how it's kind of an underappreciated aspect, the pairing between the two. I think the smart people are onto it, and it's definitely something that I'm going to be continuing to explore for myself and maybe with the podcast as well. So, but changing topics, you've just dropped PayJoin version 2.0. Mm-hmm. What does this moment represent to you? You know, not just technically, but let's just say maybe philosophically. Is it about reclaiming something that's been slipping away here, or how are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think for me, like one of the best parts of my job is that we get to bring Bitcoin privacy tools to hundreds of thousands of people. Like it can often feel in the privacy space, like with my podcast, with my platform on X, which are relatively small, it can often feel like there's just not that much, like that what I'm doing, it doesn't reach many people, or that what I'm doing isn't going to cause any impact because there's not enough reach out there. And like being able to bring a tool like PayJoin to people is really exciting and empowering. Now, I'm not going to say that like all 500,000 users of Cake are going to use PayJoin. Most of them probably, well, I don't know if most of them, but many of them I know aren't using Bitcoin anyways, but it's something where we can just really jumpstart the adoption of privacy tools like PayJoin by getting it out to a lot of people. There's a lot of smaller wallets out there. Some of them are doing some cool stuff, but there's just not as much reach there. And there's this massive need for adoption before these tools are really useful. Like before silent payments is really useful, there's going to need to be many wallets that support it. There's going to need to be exchanges and central entities, merchants, et cetera, that support it. Just like that, just like with PayJoin. It's only useful if the person you're paying or the person who's paying you also supports PayJoin. So if there's only one wallet that supports it, or if it's only a very small wallet, there's very little chance you'll actually gain any benefit from it, and it'll kind of die on the vine. So I think for me, like the very exciting part is that we're getting to be on the cutting edge, really getting to show the rest of the Bitcoin ecosystem how this can work, to get it in the hands of a ton of users, and then hopefully to spur on greater adoption. Like Cake Wallet is free and open source 100%, always will be, always has been. And ideally we're giving back, and we're providing better tools for other developers in the space to jump on, like PayJoin Dev Kit. We did a lot of work with the PayJoin Dev Kit guys to help improve the SDK while they were also doing the same thing. And that tooling just makes it a lot easier for others. Yeah.
What kind of adoption curve do you expect for PayJoin version 2 here over the next, I don't know, year or so?
Yeah, I think we could get very quickly ramping up when it comes to adoption of the PayJoin V2. It's ironed out a lot of the user experience issues that existed with V1. Basically, PayJoin V1 never happened because the requirement as a receiver was that you had an always online server, and that meant basically the only people who supported PayJoins were BTC Pay server merchants and a couple other rare exceptions. And so there was just no incentive for wallets to implement sending to PayJoin URIs because there was no way to actually use them. Like if it's kind of a chicken before the egg problem, because if no merchants or other people adopt it, if no wallets adopt it, there's no incentive for a wallet to adopt it. And so it never happens. And I think thankfully we can get ahead of that with PayJoin V2, but really the user experience is there where my vision for it is that it's a default on for every Bitcoin wallet. Where if you're sending to or receiving from a wallet that supports PayJoin V2, that just becomes the norm. You don't think about it. You don't do anything extra. You just scan the QR code, copy and paste the URI that they send you, just like you would normally for any Bitcoin transaction. And you do a PayJoin, but again, you don't have to think about it. There's no server requirement. There's nothing like that. So I think that we really can have rapidly ramping adoption with PayJoin V2. I know there's some other wallets working on adding it. Bull Bitcoin does support it right now, kind of, but their long-term goal is really cool, where they're going to be doing all their exchange withdrawals using PayJoin V2. So there's some really cool growing adoption around that. And just like silent payments, there are some really good tertiary benefits, I guess you could say. PayJoin can be an extremely useful tool for batching, for saving on fees, especially for exchanges. That's why Bull Bitcoin wants to use it, while also providing better privacy. Just like silent payments is really a massive user experience improvement for addresses and how you handle addresses in Bitcoin, while also being a privacy improvement. And almost always those are the best privacy improvements, where they happen because there's some clear incentive around it. There's a user experience benefit to it. And the privacy is just kind of a shoe-in that people maybe don't even think about. And I think that that's true of both silent payments and PayJoin. So I'm really, really hopeful and optimistic for adoption there.
What is the advice that you would give people that are not technical, that are on X and kind of see these battles going on between the developers? Like PayJoin V2 is good, it's a scam, it's amazing, right? You know, there's like a lot of craziness out there. Do you have any advice for just kind of normal people who don't have an axe to grind in that battle? I do find that to be challenging personally. It's like, okay, I'm not quite sure where to come out on this for myself. What's some advice that you might give us?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very trite, but do your own research. Like the most common thing that I see is just people aren't actually doing any reading or thinking for themselves. They're not taking the time to look into documentation, to read the Bitcoin improvement proposal, to read the content that people have put out about how these things work and about what they actually are and what they aren't. And so instead, they're just consuming whatever their favorite influencer tells them. And so you just get packs of people who don't actually know what they're talking about because the influencer they follow doesn't actually know what they're talking about. And it leads to just a lot of the brokenness that we see in the conversations around these things. Almost always, the people who actually know what they're talking about are not involved in the discussion at all, because it's a very
they just don't have time for it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're generally more quiet, and usually when they choose to wade in, there's a ton of people who attack them because they say something that actually has nuance and actually has meaning to it and isn't just whatever the topic du jour is at the moment. So I think that the biggest thing is really just like, if you see some sort of debate like this happening, step back. Don't wade into the morass of X and Twitter debates, but go find good resources on this. Like, I try to share good resources on stuff as soon as I can with any of these big events. There's some really good other people to follow on X. There's some good podcasts and stuff that actually talk through these things in a reasonable way. Like, just take a step back. Don't feel like you have to engage or make a decision at the moment you first learn about something, but rather take the time to just step back, learn about it, try to come to your own conclusions, read differing viewpoints, and try to make sense of what's going on. That's not maybe the most popular advice or approach, but will be the far more useful one to helping you build out your discernment muscles, helping you build out a better understanding of things, and ultimately allowing you to find ways to contribute as well. Because the more people actually understand what's going on, the far better the conversations, the far better the discourse will be around these things, because we'll actually be able to have conversations where we learn and we improve and we come up with better solutions and better ideas.
Right. Yeah. And I think just, your situation better than anybody else. So just everyone's got a different set of issues that they're trying to deal with.
For sure.
So what are your red lines, Seth? I think red lines, I kind of joke sometimes that every project out there should clearly state, when push comes to shove, what kind of compromise, if you had to make it, that you would just walk away from building privacy tech entirely. Like, for example, so if we have the Samourai case, right? So that comes down and it doesn't go quite the way that we would want it to go. Could there be a scenario there where you're just like, Bitcoin just is not where I want it to be able to dedicate my life, my time, my career?
Yeah. I mean, there definitely are. I mean, I would say kind of more generally from my perspective of Cake Wallet and what we're building, like the red lines for me would be if for some reason self-custody was outlawed or changed where self-custody could only happen if the user was like fully KYC'd, if they gave us their personal ID or they had to register somehow with us, that would be a red line for me.
Mm-hmm.
Two reasons. First, the obvious moral one, where I think that would be unethical and would obliterate any freedom usage because everything would be specifically tracked and surveilled down to the specific identity of each person using a wallet. And then also just for the simple reason of that would be an absolute nightmare from a technical perspective to store and manage and handle all of that data, and would make it untenable to actually be a self-custodial wallet. So I think that's one. I think the other would really be more broadly for Bitcoin. If the privacy tools that we have today, like silent payments, PayJoin, et cetera, don't take off, and if there's clearly a lack of willingness to change Bitcoin in any way at a fundamental level to improve the privacy, I think at some point it would just have to be just give up and move on to focusing solely on Monero or Monero and other cryptocurrencies where there's more privacy tech possible. That very well, like that absolutely could happen if like there's a very bad ruling in the Samourai wallet or Tornado Cash cases, because a lot of the technology that's available today, even something as basic as a self-custodial wallet or running a Lightning node or running a Bitcoin node, all of those things could be in the government sites at that point and become something that they target. So I think we would see another massive round of fallout if there was a bad ruling there and some really bad precedent set that could make it pretty untenable to be a wallet developer or to serve users with any sort of privacy tech at that point.
Yeah, that's definitely the red line for me. Just Bitcoin. That's why I follow privacy so closely in the space. I feel like that is just so fundamental to everything that I've been sold on, on the positive properties of Bitcoin. If privacy is if we just can't get good enough with that, then you got to look at, kind of other solutions. So in 2024, Monero was attacked massively. I think 2023, 2024. It's been delisted from most of the exchanges. What do you think that means in terms of the resilience of Monero? What is that telling us?
Honestly, it's been a fantastic test of the approach that was taken by Monero developers from the very beginning. There's been a very different tactic taken in Monero where a lot of the focus in Bitcoin has shifted away from more cypherpunk, more resilient ideas and ideals to ones that are more catering to mass adoption, catering to number go up, catering to mass media, catering to all these things. Whereas Monero really started out and has remained extremely laser focused on providing financial privacy even in adversarial environments. A lot of the design decisions in Monero have been ones that were called very extreme in the past by people in other cryptocurrency projects. A lot of them seem potentially more hardcore than necessary, but the vast majority of them have already been proven out in the resiliency that Monero has had against different attacks, in the way that Monero's mining has remained relatively decentralized and has remained very approachable for the average person, in the way that Monero's focus on building alternate on and off ramps has been a kind of a side hustle, so to speak, for the Monero community for many years. That has paid off. A lot of the work that went into things like Havano happened before the last wave of delistings, even though we faced delistings and refusal to list Monero for many years. A lot of the worst of it happened in the last 12 or 18 months. And this preparedness, this idea in Monero of like, we are going to face an adversarial environment. Like, private digital money is not something governments want generally. It's not something that regulators want generally. We know that there's going to be resistance to this. So we're going to do things in both the most legally above board way, which is all decentralized, all open source, no central entity with control, but also doing it in a very technically resilient way. And all of that's been proven out by this. Like when you look at what Monero is and how successful it is today, despite by far being the most targeted cryptocurrency by regulators, by exchanges, by banks, it's pretty wild to see because the technology is actually working. The demand is there, despite the lack of accessibility of Monero directly on centralized exchanges. And honestly, the ability to, like we talked about earlier, the ability to on and off ramp from Monero into other cryptocurrencies means that it doesn't really matter if they remove it from all the exchanges. Yes, it will limit the amount of people who stumble upon Monero, who just find it because they're trading other things and see it on exchange. Yes, it will make it a little bit harder for the non-crypto native person to access. But honestly, most people that would understand why they would want a Monero anyways are already crypto native. Most of them already have Bitcoin or Ethereum or other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, I think it's a generational thing, possibly. I mean, the younger people are going to figure this out, right?
Yeah, I think honestly they are. Like it's already starting to be where like kids these days, teenagers these days.
Oh, they love this
Crypto
stuff.
is it's something that's just a normal part of their life. They've a lot of it obviously in the stupid ways, the meme coin ways, all of that interesting side of cryptocurrency, but that also inevitably opens people's eyes to the actual usefulness of it. I think almost everyone I talked to came to this stuff because they wanted to make money, and then they found out that there's actually some actual human freedom that can be achieved here.
Right. We're like, oh, there's actually something going on here. Do you think that Monero has been truly attacked? Obviously, it's been kicked off. It's been attacked to some degree. But has it, that's kind of the question in my mind, and I'm not deep into Monero, but has it been really, truly attacked? Because I do feel like when I hear some of the Monero influencers out there, like, I'm like, be careful with that, right? Because they can come after developers. It's not like, they can't find you. They can find you. They can attack it. But what are your thoughts on that? Has Monero been truly, truly tested?
I would say it absolutely has, but in the sense of maybe probing attacks is a better way to phrase it, where I don't think that there has been, especially on a technical or legal perspective, an all-out war against Monero, but rather that governments and regulators have done the easy stuff, which essentially is Operation Choke Point 2.0. Monero was the first test bed of that, in my opinion, where the easy thing for governments and regulators is just force banks to not deal with anyone that touches Monero. And that takes no effort. It doesn't even take them making a law or going to any government body. Exactly. It's a phone call to say, hey, you really shouldn't do this, or an email. In the case of Operation Choke Point 2.0, the vast majority were, they just emailed a bank and said, you can't touch this. And the bank had to comply. So I think like that was the initial first step, and was the obvious one because it requires no technical effort and very little social capital. It's something you can do in the dark and have really good effectiveness in limiting who can access Monero from the traditional fiat on and off ramps. But I think beyond that, I think we've definitely seen technical probing attacks as well, where we've seen large-scale DDoS attacks against Monero nodes. We've seen a spam attack, the Black Marble attack that actually was happening when I was at Finiforum a couple of years ago. We've seen some seemingly legal attacks against Monero developers, specifically Fluffy Pony, where there was a lot of really weird stuff around why the U.S. government extradited him for some very strange case that eventually went nowhere. There was really odd timing with that. Thankfully, again, the Monero community had pre-planned for this. He did not have sole access to anything, but while he was arrested and while there was some craziness happening there, that was definitely a concern. That's certainly not proven that was a attack against Monero, but there were some very suspicious circumstances around that as well. But I think like all that said, I would gauge it as like the government has been, I don't even say the government, I would say adversaries to Monero, because I don't know if we can even say specifically who it is, but adversaries to Monero have been probing to find weaknesses for quite a while. But thankfully, especially in America, the legal precedent for writing and publishing open source code is very, very, very good. And you're generally very safe, especially if there's not a direct incentive model where you're profiting from people using the thing. Obviously, that can change. Like the Samourai and Tornado Cash cases will be pivotal in deciding if that is upheld or if they can go after the next tier of developer, which would be ones just writing open source code. But for right now, there are very good protections around that. So it's very hard for them to actually go after the people working on Monero, but rather on the technical side, probing attacks to figure out, like, if we need to shut this thing down, how do we attack it? And thankfully, every probing attack that they make means that Monero actually gets stronger. We find ways to prevent these things. We find ways to improve it and make it harder to happen in the future. But that's not to say that there won't be an all-out war or that there aren't ways that governments or nation states could attack Monero more effectively.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. What are the metrics that you look to kind of gauge Monero's popularity or if it's gaining traction? How do you look at that? Is it just the number of Monero wallets out there? What are you looking to kind of gauge that?
Yeah, main things for me, honestly, are just transaction count, because we don't have much insight into what people are doing with their Monero thanks to the privacy provided. But just transaction count to see what the overall usage of Monero looks like. And then looking at merchant adoption, I think is by far the most useful metric that we have for Monero. And that's one that is relatively easy to track. Merchants obviously want to advertise what cryptocurrencies they support. But there's been, in my opinion, a massive increase in Monero merchant adoption over the last year or two, and a very clear product market fit for Monero, where especially anything that has any desire to cater to the privacy preserving community, they are going to support Monero. It is essentially inevitable, and the demand for that is massive. When you talk to like new VPN providers, when you talk to anonymous eSIM providers, people providing any of these types of services, they either already support Monero or they're working to support Monero, because it is the perfect tool for that ecosystem, and there's massive market demand for that. But even when you talk about random things like potato chips or maple syrup or other things that are very innocuous. Yeah, I do, man. I love that dude's maple syrup.
Yeah, you get super pumped about that stuff. But I think what are you seeing there? Why are these merchants, Monero, like what's driving that? Is it the customers? What's going on there?
I think mostly the customers, honestly. It's one of those situations where, just like how people get kind of orange pilled with Bitcoin and then understand the freedom aspects later on, maybe they come to it just for number go up. I think a lot of the same thing happens with merchant adoption for Monero, where there is a very different ethos in the Monero community than the Bitcoin community and many others, where the Monero community is very pro spending and using the tools. Whereas in Bitcoin and other communities, oftentimes the focus is heavily on only storing wealth, on only appreciating value. And that very much goes against the idea of spending money. Like if you think that Bitcoin truly is the best money and you're selfish, you're not going to spend it. You're going to keep it for yourself because you want to hoard that to preserve wealth for later on. And in Monero, that's quite the opposite. And so if you know as a merchant, hey, I'm already in the crypto ecosystem, like I already, let's say, support Bitcoin for payments, and there's this rabid community of people who love to spend their cryptocurrency on anything, I'm going to want to provide support for that. And if the tools are there to make it easy, as they really are right now, and as they're continuing to improve, it's a no-brainer, honestly, from a merchant's perspective. Even if they don't care about privacy, if they have a use for the Monero, or if they have an easy way to convert that to another currency they want, like Bitcoin, which they do today, it's pretty much a no-brainer to support Monero. And that creates this massive snowball effect. And I think we've really seen that snowball effect hitting on all cylinders over the last year or so.
What percentage people use Monero as a savings technology versus digital cash? Do we have any insight into that at all?
I mean, it's very hard to gauge outside of anecdotes precisely because of the privacy of Monero. Like in Bitcoin, you can get a lot of interesting metrics around how long UTXOs are not moving, where money is stored, how much is withdrawn or deposited to exchanges, etc. We have none of that with Monero. So you really kind of have to go off measuring vibes, for lack of a better term, and just kind of seeing how people talk about things. I did. Yeah. I don't know how else. It's vibe metrics, I guess. That's like the best way I have is talking about it.
I'm feeling the vibe metrics. That's why I'm asking a lot of questions on this. And I didn't really quite plan on to get into it, but I'm definitely feeling a vibe shift, especially
Absolutely.
In the last year. I'm seeing more and more companies, e-commerce websites accept Monero. Like clearly there is something going on. And I worry, as someone who's, very passionate about Bitcoin, is I think long-term, I'm like, if this is not being used as digital cash, then what does that say? What are the implications of that, right? And it's hard to say, like, maybe we'll know in 10 years, but what happens to to Monero or to Bitcoin and the success of it if it's just not really being used, right? And it's just a store of value. I don't know. To me, in my thesis, I think that's like a huge, huge thing to think
Absolutely.
about.
Absolutely.
What is your definition of, let me take a step back. So Jack Dorsey recently said, quite a few people recently said, I think Zeus, the founder, right, said that if Bitcoin isn't digital cash, then we go home. That's kind of their red line. I don't know when we get to that point, when they're faced with that reality or not, either way. But what do you think? How do you think of it?
I mean, I definitely agree. I think the core reason is that this whole model that's become the prevailing narrative in Bitcoin of store of value, of digital gold, that only works if at least one of two things are true. If there is not an adversarial environment and you can do whatever you want with your Bitcoin without any repercussions, or if there is a massive set of places and people that you can actually send Bitcoin directly peer-to-peer with to transact, that there's a circular economy that you can actually spend this stuff at. Assuming that we will never enter an adversarial environment, especially after we were just in my opinion, the most adversarial 2 years in the Bitcoin space from a government and regulator perspective, assuming that will continue on forever is, I think, pretty dangerous and asinine to think that we won't ever be in a place where you're restricted in what you're legally able to do with your Bitcoin. Especially as Bitcoin becomes more normal, more folded into the legacy financial system, more accepted and understood by governments, they're going to want to make sure that that fits into their existing control systems. Now, the second one, if we have a circular economy where we can actually spend Bitcoin, that is practically unstoppable. Like, say what we want about Bitcoin's privacy, say what we want about centralization risks with mining, except in rare circumstances. If I can pay you directly and get the good or service that I want, that's going to be very immune to anything but the most stringent attacks by a government or regulator. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really unlocks the freedom money aspects of Bitcoin. So I definitely agree that if this digital cash side, if this desire and technical ability to use Bitcoin as digital cash goes away, so does the usefulness of Bitcoin, even as a store of value. Because if you can't actually spend or use it anywhere and you have to convert it to fiat to get any benefit from it, you necessarily are greatly restricted in the usefulness of that money by whoever is in power, by whoever has any say in what you're doing. And that can shift very quickly to go from bad to worse.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So let's end on this. Thank you, by the way. You are a fascinating individual. What kind of world are you hoping to shape in the next, let's just say 5, 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think honestly for me, this is where like the idea and philosophy of crypto anarchy is so inviting, because the real idea for me is like, I just want people to be able to use these tools to live the life that they want to live. Like I hate seeing people oppressed and repressed. I hate seeing governments and nation states increasing their power and control. And I love seeing individuals take back control of their own data, take back control of their own lives, take back control of their own money. So really the future that I see is one where no matter what governments or nation states want to do, the individual who wakes up has the tools available to opt out of a broken system and to opt into freedom. That might not necessarily look like this hyper Bitcoinization, we all have citadels kind of thing. That might not look like a super hardcore crypto anarchist. The world is dystopian, but I can do stuff because of the tools that I have. I hope that it's neither of those things, honestly, but rather just that people have more freedom because of the technology that I'm able to build, that I'm able to educate on, that others are able to build in the space. And if that is true, that will be a win. Got it. Awesome. Seth, I think we can end it there. Where can people follow you? What's the best place to do that? On X, I presume? Yes. Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah. X is really, I mean, that's where I'm generally talking about what I'm working on, what I'm thinking about. At Seth for Privacy is where you can find me there. I am technically on Nostr, like we talked about before, but I never post there for time constraints, really. And beyond that, SethForPrivacy.com, I have a lot of like random guides and writing and other stuff there that people might find interesting. And then most of my time right now is dedicated to Cake Wallet. We're a self-custodial, privacy-centric, multi-crypto wallet. I'm the VP there. I just joined in September of 2024, and it's been an absolutely fantastic time already. But we're working really hard to actually make all of this stuff as practically possible as we can. So cakewallet.com is where you can learn more about us. That's amazing. Seth, I can't believe the amount of product that you put out. I'm like, does this guy sleep? I mean, it's like, new feature here, new feature there. Yeah. You learn two things very quickly. Is one, the amount of time that you have in the day can be used to do a lot more productive things than you realize when you're younger. I thought that there was so little time in the day before and that it took so long to do things, and you can be a lot more productive than you think when you're pressed. But also just on the Cake Wallet side, like the team that Vic has built here is absolutely insanely talented. And it's been amazing to they're the ones doing the hard work, herding cats and helping to establish good processes and make their lives easier. But the amount that they're able to ship constantly blows me away whenever I look back at the releases that we've made. So it's been an absolute blast getting to help them with that and champion the work that they're doing. Amazing. Seth, thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you do. We're rooting for you. We'll be following everything that you do. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Absolute blast. That's it for this episode of the Unbounded Podcast. If you took something away from this conversation, share it.
Spread the word. These tools, these ideas, this fight, they only matter if we move them forward together. Big thanks to Seth for privacy, for showing up with clarity, nuance, and conviction. Until next time, stay sharp, stay sovereign, stay unbounded.